Well, good morning. It's good to be with you all today. Thankful to God and to the elders for the chance to study the scriptures together this morning. This morning, we're going to consider an encounter that Jesus has in the 8th chapter of the Gospel according to Matthew. This is an encounter that I think reveals something profound about his authority, about his kingdom, and the kind of faith that pleases him. So if you haven't already opened to Matthew, I'd encourage you to grab a Bible and join me there. Be very simple today. We're only using one text. So if you turn there, you're good for the whole lesson. In the larger context of Matthew's account, he has guided us through Jesus' family history, his birth, his baptism by John, his temptations in the wilderness by the devil, and the calling of some of his disciples. He's also begun proclaiming the gospel, the good news that the kingdom of heaven is at hand. The promised king has come, and God's reign is breaking into the world. In the past, I didn't really appreciate just how carefully that Matthew constructs and crafts his narrative to reveal more and more about who Jesus is. His genealogy points us back to Abraham, through whom God promised blessing to all the nations, to Jesse, from whose line a spirit-filled king was going to rise, and to David, whose throne God promised would endure forever. Then Matthew weaves in the prophets, a child born of a virgin, born in Bethlehem, who would be Emmanuel, or God with us. Even Jesus' early years echo Israel's story, taken down into Egypt and later brought out again, passing through the waters of baptism, as Israel passed through the Red Sea, then going into the wilderness for testing, just as Israel was tested in the wilderness for 40 years. And when Jesus is baptized, the Spirit descends upon him, as Isaiah foretold would happen for the coming servant. Matthew even shows us Jesus' life in parallel with Moses, a ruler's killing babies in an attempt to stamp out God's plan, but a prophet is preserved to lead God's people. Moses himself said that God would raise up a prophet like him from among their brothers, and Matthew wants us to see Jesus as that prophet and far more. And when Jesus goes to Galilee, to the regions of Zebulun and Naphtali, Matthew says it fulfills Isaiah's words that the people dwelling in darkness have seen a great light. All of that to say, Matthew's carefully painting this portrait of Jesus. He begins with these broad strokes of the covenant promises of the prophets of Israel's story. And with each scene, he fills in more and more detail until we begin to clearly see who Jesus truly is. And the last time I preached, we looked at the beginning of chapter 8. The first person that Jesus heals, that at least Matthew zooms in on and tells us about, is this man with leprosy, a man considered unclean, a man who'd likely gone years without human touch. And when he comes to Jesus, he doesn't simply ask to be healed, he asks to be cleansed. And how does Jesus respond? He reaches out and he touches him, not becoming unclean himself, but making that man clean. You see, our uncleanness does not corrupt him, but his holiness cleanses us. And now Matthew's going to show us something perhaps more surprising. Remarkable faith that's not shown in the religious elite of Israel, but in a Gentile centurion. With that in mind, I'm going to go ahead and read again Matthew 8, starting in verse 5. When he had entered Capernaum, a centurion came forward to him, appealing to him, "Lord, my servant is lying paralyzed at home, suffering terribly." And he said to him, "I will come and heal him." But the centurion replied, "Lord, I am not worthy for you to come under my roof, but only say the word, and my servant will be healed. For I too am a man under authority, with soldiers under me. I say to one, 'Go,' and he goes, and to another, 'Come,' and he comes, and to my servant, 'Do this,' and he does it." When Jesus heard this, he marveled and said to those who followed him, "Truly I tell you, with no one in Israel have I found such faith." I tell you, many will come from east and west and recline at table with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob in the kingdom of heaven, while the sons of the kingdom will be thrown into outer darkness. In that place there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. And to the centurion, Jesus said, Go, let it be done for you as you have believed. And the servant was healed at that very moment. So the scene begins with Jesus entering Capernaum. From what I read, this is likely a relatively small town, perhaps around 1,000, maybe 1,500 people. And as Jesus enters, a Roman centurion comes publicly to meet him. Now, centurion would be a Roman military officer, right? That's the occupying power. And he'd generally be over about 100 soldiers. So this isn't a Jew. This is a Gentile. This is a representative of Rome itself. So you've got Jesus, who up to this point in what Matthew has taught us is known primarily as a Jewish teacher. Not an ordinary Jewish teacher. At the end of chapter 7, it said that the crowd said he taught as one who had authority, not as one of their scribes. But still, you've got a Jewish teacher who's being publicly approached by a Roman centurion. And note what he says to Jesus. He says, Lord, my servant is lying paralyzed at home, suffering terribly. Just a few interesting notes about this statement. First, he calls Jesus Lord. Next, he's not asking about a family member. He's asking about a servant. And at least so far, he has yet to actually make any request of Jesus. He simply tells him his servant is paralyzed and suffering. A Roman soldier in the ancient world could easily view servants as disposable property. Yet this man is distressed over his suffering, and he clearly values his servant as he's approaching a Jew for help. So before we even talk about this man's faith, we already see his character. He's compassionate. He's humble. He's concerned for others, including those who aren't even in his social class. And he recognizes an authority greater than his own, greater than Rome itself. And so how does Jesus respond to this man? Jesus immediately offers to come. There's no hesitation. There's no resistance, no testing. I will come and heal him. But instead of just accepting his offer, as I feel like maybe that's what I'd do, right? The centurion just seems overwhelmed by this idea. Jesus, Lord Jesus, enter my home? I am not even worthy. The thought of Jesus entering his home overwhelms him. Whatever respect or authority that this man possessed in the eyes of Rome, he doesn't think himself worthy to receive Jesus under his roof, even when Jesus is the one offering for this. So instead, he proposes another idea. He says, how about you just say it? Just say the word. Just say it's going to happen, and it'll happen. See, the centurion says he knows how authority works. If he tells someone to go somewhere, then they go. If he tells them to come, they come. If he tells them to do something, they do it. His men simply obey. There's so much going on here, and I'm going to try and do my best to tell you what I see. But you remember how this conversation started. He didn't tell Jesus what he wanted or what he expected to happen. The centurion approaches Jesus with remarkable restraint. He doesn't come making demands. He doesn't presume upon Jesus. He simply lays out the situation before him. I'm sure he wants his servant to be healed, but he doesn't even ask. He just tells him what's going on. My servant is paralyzed and he's suffering. Whatever Jesus decides he's going to do with that information, then that's just up to Jesus. That's more than humility. It's submission. He's not willing to allow Jesus to even enter his home, so I wonder if he even felt like he was able to ask directly for him to heal his servant. What else is going on here? Right? The objective is not for Jesus to send a servant or for him to ask a servant to come to him, right? The authority that the centurion describes is authority over people, But when he looks at Jesus, he recognizes something even greater than that. Jesus does not command mere soldiers. He commands sickness itself. And I think that helps us to see something important about the authority of Jesus. I think sometimes we hear the word authority and we maybe think merely in terms of like commands and obedience, maybe like the right to tell someone what to do. Certainly that could be included here, but the centurion sees something greater still to that. Jesus' authority is not merely authority to issue commands to people, it's authority over creation itself. Sickness obeys him. Later in Matthew, you see the wind and the waves obey him. That's not mere legislative authority. That is sovereign authority. Supreme authority with no higher power above it. And notice something else. The centurion, he doesn't merely say, I'm a man with authority. He says, I'm a man under authority. He understands obedience because he himself obeys. He understands command because he himself submits. And I think that's part of why he recognizes Jesus so clearly, because pride resists authority, but humility recognizes it. Many in Israel, they saw Jesus' power, but they resisted his authority. This centurion sees the authority and he immediately submits himself to it. And notice how the centurion understands that that authority can operate, right? In his world, authority would normally require at least some level of presence, right? If a soldier's going to obey, you've got to be there and issue the command to the soldier. If a task is going to be carried out, then someone kind of needs to oversee that. Authority in ordinary experience is tied to proximity. He may not need to babysit his guys when they go to do what he asks them, but he still needs to be able to tell them directly. But what the centurion confesses about Jesus is different still. Jesus does not need to enter this home. He doesn't need to lay hands on this servant. He doesn't need to perform some ritual. His word itself carries his authority. The sickness is going to obey him from a distance, from afar. And whether the centurion fully understood it or not, there's something here that echoes creation itself. Maybe you're already thinking that. But in Genesis, God speaks and reality obeys. Right? Let there be light, and there was light. Here, the centurion believes that Jesus possesses that same kind of authority. He can simply speak, and sickness itself must obey. He does not ask Jesus to appeal to someone higher. He believes that this authority belongs to Jesus himself. Before we go further, I heard an analogy recently I found helpful about faith. I think we can all agree that airplanes exist, right? And maybe some of you have learned something about aerodynamics or physics or engines. Maybe you even believe flying's statistically safe, but maybe you've never actually boarded an airplane, right? Faith is more than acknowledging facts. To have actual faith in that airplane, you got to get on board and take a flight. You have to entrust yourself to it. Biblical faith is not merely saying true things about Jesus. It's entrusting yourself to him because you believe that he's trustworthy. Now, some people might spend that whole flight anxious, right? And others might sleep peacefully. Some might sleep from some extra help that they get, right? But if they're on the plane, they still entrusted themselves to the plane and to that pilot. The issue isn't a perfect confidence. The issue is whether you trusted enough to get on board. Here, the centurion is not merely saying, I believe Jesus can heal. He's saying, my servant is suffering, and I trust Jesus completely. My servant's paralyzed, and Jesus' words have authority over his condition. Now, how does Jesus react to all this? He says that no one that he has encountered in Israel has had faith like this centurion. Who is he with? Right? It's one of those things pop. He's got followers. He's got people who've been watching him do all this. And yet, the most impressive faith that he's run across It's right here. And Matthew tells us something remarkable. It says, Jesus marveled. Jesus marveled. The one Matthew's presented as greater than Moses, fulfilling prophecy, exercising authority that belongs to God alone, he marvels at this man's faith. And what kind of a man? It's not a scribe. It's not a Pharisee. It's not a priest. He's not even a Jew. This is a Gentile soldier. Interestingly, the only other occasion where the Gospels specifically seem to use this word marveled is in Mark 6, when those who are in Nazareth, the people with that greatest exposure to him, they respond in unbelief, and Jesus marvels at their unbelief. It's not to say Jesus didn't react strongly to other events, and I'm not going to get into specifics on words and such, but at least in the ESV, the marveled word only appears in these instances. And so you see that this word is used specifically for two things: to react to extraordinary faith and extraordinary unbelief. Amen. Now, the point is not that the Gentiles are automatically better than the Jews, but the contrast is between a humble faith and a covenant presumption, between those who trust the king and those who assume that they belong to the kingdom simply because of their heritage. Throughout Matthew's account, we often see this contrast between those who think that they're guaranteed a kingdom participation because of their physical descent from Abraham, and those to whom the kingdom actually belongs, right? Those who trust the king. As I said in the beginning, Matthew already brought our minds back to Abraham, through whom all nations would be blessed, and he reminded us of all these different prophecies being fulfilled. And now, in just the second miracle that he zooms in on, we're already seeing a preview of the kingdom expanding outward. We see blessings promised through Abraham beginning to flow out to all nations. And Jesus, he never wastes a teachable moment, does he? He takes the time here to remind those that are following him, this kingdom isn't yours by entitlement. In fact, he says there are going to be many invited to the kingdom, even those who consider themselves sons of the kingdom will ultimately be cast out. Meanwhile, people from the east and from the west, and I'm probably not pointing in the right directions, but people from all over are going to come and recline at the table with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob in the kingdom of heaven. And what a tragic picture that is. Jesus is describing this great banquet. There's fellowship, there's joy, there's belonging in the kingdom, with the faithful who've gone on before, and many who assumed they already had a seat at that table, they're going to lose it. And it's not because there's no room for them, it's because they refuse the king who invited them. I think there's something important in that phrase, the weeping and the gnashing of teeth. I think sometimes maybe we focus on the weeping, the sorrow, but throughout Scripture, gnashing teeth, that's associated with anger, hostility, resentment. Part of the tragedy may be that many rejected the very kind of kingdom Jesus is bringing. They wanted a kingdom that exalted themselves and cast down their enemies. But Jesus is bringing a kingdom that welcomes repentant sinners, tax collectors, Gentiles, outcasts who trust him in faith. And throughout Matthew, we see exactly that response, don't we? This is not some long, far-off, distant fulfillment. As Jesus announces his kingdom, many reject him. As he eats with tax collectors and sinners, they criticize him. As he brings healing and rest to the sick and to the disabled, they slander him. As he casts out demons, they accuse him of being empowered by the devil. The tragedy is that many who assumed they belonged to the kingdom rejected the king himself. And in rejecting him, they excluded themselves from the kingdom that he was bringing. And he says, they've got no place in my kingdom. They're going to be thrown out. So what's ironic is that this centurion, who likely knew a lot less theology, knew a lot less about God than many Israelites, he trusted Jesus more. And he's going to be welcome in his kingdom. So what's Jesus' response to the centurion? Go. Let it be done for you as you have believed." And the servant was healed at that very moment. As you have believed. One thing I've noticed working through the Gospels is Jesus repeatedly responds to faith, to people who trust him enough to bring their needs before him, to rely on him, to entrust themselves to his care. What exactly is it that Jesus commends in this centurion? Certainly he believes Jesus has the power to heal. I mean, that alone, that'd be remarkable for a Gentile Roman officer. But his faith, it goes deeper than that. He doesn't demand. He doesn't bargain. He doesn't presume. He simply lays this need before Jesus. My servant's suffering. Then he says, just say the word. He trusts in Jesus' authority. He trusts in Jesus' goodness. He trusts that Jesus cares. And he recognizes in Jesus an authority which even sickness itself must submit to. The centurion does not merely believe things about Jesus, he entrusts himself to him. And Jesus says, that's faith. That's faith. And isn't it beautiful that this suffering servant, he's healed through the compassion and the faith of another one who went to Jesus for him? What a blessing it is to have people who can bring our burdens before God when maybe we're too weak to carry them ourselves. So what does that kind of faith look like in us? I think for me, one of the hardest parts comes down to the way the centurion approached Jesus. So often I work out in my own head, okay, here's the problem, here's what I think needs to happen, so Jesus, can you take care of that? Just make this happen. I may not say it like that, right? But that's kind of maybe what's going on in my head. I'm not saying we can't ask for a specific kind of deliverance and from a trial or pray for a certain outcome. That's not what I'm saying here. And I think we can be aligned with what he wants and be asking for very good things. But I think that this is the posture that we need to adopt, or at least the posture I know I need to adopt. Lord, here's my situation, and I trust you with it. I think the solution may be best, but if that's not how this turns out, I know you're good. And I trust you're going to sustain me through it. I also see a call for us to trust in his authority with humility and submission. If we truly believe he upholds the universe by the word of his power, that creation itself responds to his authority, and we believe he's good, we're going to come to him with both confidence and submission. No burden's too great to bring before him if we're seeking his will and his goodness. And there's a warning here for us as well. We're not gatekeepers of the kingdom. It's not for us to decide who's in and who's out. Our picture of what the kingdom looks like and who should be in it needs to be shaped by Jesus himself. This is his kingdom. And part of belonging to his kingdom is submitting to it on his terms and not ours. The centurion understood something many missed. Jesus was not merely a good teacher. He's not a miracle worker just to observe and watch. He is the king whose word creation itself obeys. He is the king whose word creation itself obeys. So this morning, the question is not whether you know things about Jesus. The question is, are you going to entrust yourself to him? Yes, you might know facts about flying, but have you boarded the plane? Have you entrusted yourself to the one who has authority over sickness, suffering, and creation itself? And if you're afraid to take that step, understand faith does not require a perfect confidence. Faith means trusting Jesus enough to come to him anyway. So do you trust him? Do you trust his authority? Do you trust his goodness? Have you entrusted yourself to the King? If this morning you'd like to begin that walk in baptism, or if you have some other wish you need to make known, something you'd like us to pray with you about, we invite you to come forward now as we stand and as we sing.